Good morning. I'm Ben Ayers. I'm Dean of the Terry College of Business. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our Terry Third Thursday here at their Exec Ed Center. This is the home of our Executive MBA, our Professional MBA, Online MBA, as well as our Exec Ed programs. It's my pleasure to welcome you this morning. I want to thank our Alumni Board for organizing today's event and this entire series. And also, please join me in thanking our corporate sponsor, Synovus, and our media sponsor, WABE. So please join me in thanking them. I did want to highlight, since I have been traveling with our economic outlook across the state, and so it's been a month or so since I've been at this event. I did want to highlight over the past month or so, we got great rankings from Financial Times, which is a global ranking full-time MBA programs. Our full-time MBA program ranked number one globally in terms of value. That is the Financial Times measure for upward mobility, social mobility, and we ranked top 5 among U.S. public schools, top 20 in the U.S. overall, and 40th globally. And so that's a great sign of the quality of not only of our full-time program, but the same faculty members that teach in that program also teach in our executive MBA, our professional, and our online MBA program. So good things are happening at the Terry here in Atlanta and on campus. Upcoming events for next month, we'll have Mayor Andrew Dickens, and a roundtable of members of his cabinet will be here in April. In May, we'll have Alex Zigliara, who's the CEO of Mr. Beast Feastables, and then we'll wrap up this first half of the year with Katie Kirkpatrick, who's the CEO of the Metro Atlanta Chamber. So our alumni board does a great job every month of inviting terrific speakers. Today is another great example of that, and I'm going to ask Philip Hite if he'll come up, who's a member of our alumni board, to introduce today's speaker. Philip?
Thank you, Ben. Good morning. I am Philip Hite, co-founder of Hite Knox Properties, and it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker and good friend of mine, Jeff Small. Jeff is one of the most interesting people you will find in industrial real estate. He is the co-founder and CEO of MDH Partners, a private equity industrial real estate firm managing multiple funds totaling more than $2.5 billion of assets under management. His responsibilities include the company's strategic direction, underwriting its new acquisitions and developments, and managing its relationships with its investors. Before founding MDH, Jeff was president and CEO of MD Hodges Enterprises, an Atlanta-based industrial development company founded by his grandfather in the 1950s. Starting in his family business in 1993, Jeff took over the company in '97 and later sold it to Blackstone. Lost my place here. He ran the business for Blackstone for 5 years before selling it a second time in 2005 to Clarion Partners, after which he started MDH. He attended Yale University as an undergraduate and received his law degree from Harvard. He began his career as an attorney with King & Spalding. He also more recently earned a master's degree in religion from Oxford University. In his spare time, Jeff's interests are wide and ranging. Just a couple of those include competitive ballroom dancing with his wife, Allison, and having written 2 published novels. Jeff serves on the Board of Trustees of the Westminster Schools in Atlanta and the Episcopal Advisory Board of the Candler School of Theology at Emory University, where he has also taught as an adjunct professor. Without further ado, please welcome Jeff Small.
First, everyone can hear me okay with this? Good. So I knew Philip had to be desperate for speakers when he reached out to me a few months ago, but really excited and honored to be joining you today. So first, quick show of hands. Who here is in the real estate business in some way? So, wow, a lot of people. So I apologize if some of this is a little too basic, but you know, and when I ask, like, well, what do people want to hear about? It's like a little bit about kind of your story, your business. So really kind of want to focus on our investing philosophy, a little bit of our story of kind of how we got to where we are. But as Philip mentioned, so we are today, I've gone through so many different kind of iterations in my career, from family business to doing joint ventures with some great institutions, to today we are what's known as a fund manager. And basically what that is we get capital from large institutions, and in our case, they are all nonprofits. So large university endowments and foundations, and they entrust us with their money, and then we invest it in real estate across the country. So our focus is the sexiest of all real estate, industrial real estate. And as I'll talk about in a little bit, I think what's really interesting about our business is not our buildings. So even though this one on the slide is one, I think this is one of our, we have hundreds around the country now. I think this is one that from Phoenix. But so let's start with the most basic. What is industrial? So when we talk about industrial real estate, in the past, most people would never have thought about us. But it's all the real estate around the supply chain, or what's known as logistics, the movement of goods, of how things get from manufacturing into your house. So who cared about logistics before 2020, right? Anyone have some issues in 2020 that all of a sudden we started talking about the supply chain? Well, that also caused an explosion in our space. And so really industrial real estate, it's around warehousing, where you're storing your goods. A huge piece of this over the last decade has been the explosion of e-commerce. So every time you get those Amazon boxes that are showing up on your door, rather than going across the street to the mall, that is additional demand that you need for warehouses that are storing those boxes near to where you live so that they can get there in 2 days, 2 hours, whatever it is. But it's broader than just that. So everything that you're eating today has been in a cold storage facility somewhere. So basically it's a warehouse that could be refrigerated. And it's quite the interesting experience. If you've been, I've been in Texas where it's 110 degrees outside in the summer, walking into, we own the buildings, if anyone has eaten at a Whataburger, they're big in Texas and Oklahoma, all of their patties are made in 2 of our buildings. So you can go from 110 outside to minus 10 degrees and 50,000 square feet as you're walking around, and it's quite the shock. But that's cold storage. Manufacturing is part of the supply chain and part of industrial real estate. Even some kind of more specialty things like truck terminals. IOS is a new category, which basically means industrial outside storage. It's like a parking lot for trucks and equipment and stuff outside. And then finally, all the real estate around air cargo, around our ports, around intermodal with railroads, all this stuff falls under the category of industrial real estate. So the question is, why is this important? Why is this an interesting asset class to invest in? And because in the past, we were kind of below the radar screen. Like everyone cared about, the shiny malls, the tall office towers. I mean, those were the sexy asset classes. But really what's interesting to me about industrial, it is the true backbone of our economy. Everything that you see in this room, everything in your house, everything you put in your mouth has come through the supply chain and through industrial real estate. So whereas we have the most boring architecture, like the real estate itself is a concrete box, right? I mean, it's not the sexiest thing. It's not rocket science of how you build these things. But what goes into it, and when you start touring these, my interest is not like what does the real estate look like, but it's talking to the tenants and how do they produce the things that end up that you use every day, or things that we don't normally think about. What's even better from an investment standpoint, over the past decade, because of the drivers of e-commerce and then the supply chain problems with the pandemic, it has been the strongest performing real estate asset class. That when you buy something on Amazon versus going to the store, it actually requires 30% more warehouse and industrial real estate. Because rather than going to the store, you need to have warehouses all around the country so that those goods, because Amazon is conditioned to all of us to want the good immediately, right? It's no longer, who here will order something on Amazon if it's going to take a week to get to you now, right? I won't. I'll keep, I'll pay the extra $2 to find the seller that can get it to me tomorrow. But that's created this huge extra demand for industrial real estate. The other thing is that people don't realize is a much larger percentage of goods are returned when you buy them online. I won't ask for a show of hands, but I assume there's probably multiple people in here that shop at Zappos. Does anyone order one pair of shoes at a time from Zappos? No, you order 3 pairs, and then you find the one that's right. I see some people smiling, and then you find the one that fits, and then you return the other 2. Well, when the warehouse gets those back, how nicely, neatly are they packaged up? They're not, right? Whatever that stuffing in the shoes, that's gone somewhere else. Occasionally they'll get them back and someone's gone for a run and they decided they didn't want it and there's mud on it. So it creates a huge amount of additional needed space, which we call reverse logistics, and it requires more warehouse space. So in the pandemic, with the supply chains disruptions, we saw that this model of manufacturing and logistics that has been around since the late 1980s and the early 1990s, called just-in-time manufacturing, where the idea that we stole from the Japanese was, can we decrease the cost of goods, of getting goods to you, by not having things just sitting around on the shelves, but trying to manufacture it right before you need it. And then in the manufacturing process, and Michael Dell with Dell Computers in Austin really perfected this by studying the Japanese, of rather than the manufacturer sitting on a lot of raw materials and parts, that he wanted to have his suppliers located right next to him and only give him the screens, the chips, the keyboards right before he needed them. So this created really efficient supply chains throughout the country, which gave us cheaper goods, and that works until it doesn't. And then as soon as you have something like the pandemic, and then you realize that you're overly dependent on factories in China or shipping, and then you have 30, 40, 50 ships sitting off the coast of Los Angeles and Long Beach that can't get into the port, and then you can't get your toilet paper. So because of that, this whole idea behind just-in-time manufacturing is now retailers and manufacturers are starting to think about just-in-case. So we need to keep more supply of stuff, which increases the demand of industrial real estate. Similarly, with all the issues we've had with China, it's causing a move of manufacturing back toward us. So we can call that reshoring, meaning stuff that we offshored and sent to China, coming back to the United States, or onshoring. We see those 2 words. Nearshoring means let's put it in Mexico so that it's much closer. The labor in Mexico is actually cheaper than it is in China, which is why we've seen an explosion of manufacturing just across the border in Mexico, and it's why today we are building in El Paso, and there's a huge demand, a lot of industrial development in Laredo and El Paso, Texas, these border towns, because rather than, if you're manufacturing in China and it takes 2 weeks for your goods to sit on a cargo ship, and then if there's a strike of the labor at the ports in LA and Long Beach, or you've got to get it through the Panama Canal and get it into Savannah, that's a timely, expensive, long process, versus it's made across the border, and within an hour, that truck can be in Texas in the United States. So all these demands are shifts in the supply chain driving the need for industrial real estate. And finally, it's just long-term growth of the economy. The more growth we have, the more we all go out and buy stuff, and the more warehouse space that you need for it. So that's why we do it. So here's just a kind of quick snapshot on who we are. So I'm from Atlanta native, went to Westminster my entire life. And we're headquartered here, we've got an office in Dallas, but we are coast to coast. So we have investments across the country. We've done about $7 billion over the 30 years of my career. And as I mentioned, as Philip mentioned, I started in this, got into this business because it was a family business. My grandfather was kind of a legendary developer here from the 1950s to the early 90s, which is when I joined him. And as Philip mentioned, I sold the company, the family business, to Blackstone in 1999 and then ran it for them. And that transitioned me from being in a family business into being a private equity institutional business. And it's a very different mindset of how you think. Family businesses, we had a 20-year plan, very, very conservative. When you get in that private equity world, it's how can we do everything that we can in the next 5 years and sell it all and make the most amount that we can for our investors. And since then, we've been really fortunate to have really strong institutional capital partners. From Wells Fargo has used to have a small private equity group. Thank you, Jeffrey. He was one of our capital partners. And then what really changed for us was we got into the endowment world with a joint venture with Harvard University's endowment in the beginning of 2014. That was a 4-year joint venture, about $1 billion of real estate that we built up with them and then sold to Blackstone again, this theme that keeps coming up. That then evolution from starting, doing these joint ventures with institutions, then having kind of Harvard doing a really successful venture with them, led the other IVs to kind of start to look at us. And then that put us into the fund business, which we started our first fund in 2019. So it really hasn't been very long at all, only on our 5th year. But in those 5 years, we've gotten up to $2.5 billion of equity under management. So we just raised our 3rd fund, closed that 2 weeks ago. It's $1.2 billion of equity. And so we also use leverage. We put debt on everything that we buy. So that kind of gives us about $3 billion of buying power over the next 4 years. And we've just finished up investing Fund 2, which was $750 million. And then our first fund that we did with these endowments, we sold 2 years ago to the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Singapore, GIC. But it was an interesting sale because they can't, as a foreign entity, they couldn't manage things themselves, so we ended up structuring it as a joint venture. And so MDH, we kept an ownership stake and we still manage it for GIC. So this is kind of what we look like today. But how did we get there? Like, how did you get these huge institutions to give you billions of dollars? Because it doesn't happen overnight. It's something that we've kind of grown through our strategy over time. So here's our basic investment strategy. And again, this isn't rocket science. A lot of this is just good business real estate 101. So first of all, our overall strategy is we're going to acquire, meaning we go out and buy assets. We're going to develop, we're real estate people, so we want to build buildings, add value from the ground up, and then we manage these assets and we try to create value through the management of it. So it's by buying the right buildings, building them, and then managing them in a really institutional way. But then the ultimate goal when you're in this private equity world, every investment that we make, we have to think about how we're selling it, who is going to buy this after us. So part of the strategy is rolling our sleeves up and aggregating piece by piece into a large portfolio that a much larger institution than us is going to want to pay a premium for at the end of the day. We focus a lot on infill buildings. Maybe these buildings might be 20, 30, 40 years old, but it's very hard to replace them today. And with e-commerce, as we need goods closer and closer to people, a lot of those buildings have become even more valuable than some of the brand new buildings. While we're coast to coast and we go up into the Midwest, we're in Chicago and Minneapolis, we do focus on the Sun Belt because the more growth you have in people and businesses, the more goods you need in those markets. As we're buying, we love to work with other family businesses because that was our background. We feel like we're the kindler, gentler private equity firm. We're based in the South. My Southern accent may come out a little bit more when I'm talking to these people, versus them having to go and deal with New York private equity capital. And we've built a reputation for actually just being easy to work with. Life is too short to... This is being recorded. So life is too short to be a difficult person. And, we just want to make the transactions easy for the people that we work with so that they come back and do more business with us over time. During more difficult economic times, we buy empty buildings from distressed owners at a discount. We'll also buy brand new, fully leased buildings that have good income and that have lower returns, but that help balance out our portfolio. And finally, we build buildings from the ground up. So all of these kind of aspects kind of add in to the strategy over time. But I think the single thing that has really distinguished us is we are hyper-focused on the timing of our deals. And so I think we all know, even though half of you are in the real estate world already, those of you who aren't, everyone kind of realizes intuitively that real estate is a cyclical business. And so this is one of our other founding partners loves this picture here of, some of the lessons with real estate. If you sell, at the wrong time, versus sometimes it's better to take the right profit at the right time. But so we all think about real estate as kind of being cyclical. So I want to kind of walk you through, again, I apologize if this is a little too basic for some of you real estate people, but this is actually how I really kind of think about when I'm struggling with where in the market we are and how we should invest. So I kind of think about almost like kind of this clock thing, and that you have periods where real estate will be worth a lot of money, and people are really enthusiastic, and then the opposite, you're in some deep economic recession, and everyone's giving buildings back to the bank. And then I've kind of put in the middle, kind of at 9 and 3 in that time period, that sometimes that's kind of the replacement cost. When you can buy buildings above replacement cost, you're kind of closer to the peak. When things cost, you can buy stuff cheaper than you can build it, you're below that. So with this, there's also a psychology that goes along with this kind of clock. So if you kind of think back in time to the last kind of great recession of 2008-9 with the financial crisis then, coming out of that, we were really slow coming out of the financial crisis. 2010, 11, and 12 were pretty slow, but you kind of started to get to 2012 and 13, and people saw this light. You were growing slowly, but it had been a couple of years since the trough of the recession. And so you get this sense of hope that you can see that light at the end of the tunnel. Stuff is still not trading well. People aren't making money yet, but you kind of feel like maybe this is a good time to invest. And then over time, this hope, as the economy continues to grow and people's investments are making more, it turns into an excitement. And now all of a sudden, the stuff that you've been buying the last few years is worth more than you paid for it, or you started building and you're making money on your new developments, more and more capital starts coming into the space. Now, real estate would be awesome if we could just stay in this quadrant, right? But does that ever happen? No, it does not, because at some point the excitement turns into exuberance. And I won't ask who in here is guilty of this, but if you give any real estate developer capital, it doesn't matter where in the economy that you are, they will start building. If they have access, and usually, a lot of the times, it's usually the banks that are the ones that have to govern us because we have no discipline. And so if we are not being disciplined and the banks keep giving us money and there's equity, we will keep building until it's a problem. And that at this point where everything seems so fantastic, that's your point of the biggest danger. And at some point that peak passes, and usually there's some outside economic event that then combines with all the construction that's going on to push you past that peak. But you don't usually often go, the GFC was one where it went pretty quick from peak to trough. A lot of times there's warning signs and people start talking, we're a little bit concerned, but hey, assets are still trading at a premium, even though maybe they're going in the wrong direction. So it's not too much concern until things start deteriorating and then the fear sets in. Like now, the stuff you bought and built up here is worth less than you paid for it. If things continue to deteriorate, then you're having to have the very difficult conversations with your banks. Fortunately, we have not had to have these in the past, but that's when people are having to give buildings back. People are going bankrupt, and that sense of hopelessness. But just as at the peak, there was the danger with the exuberance when everything is so great, at this point of most despair is also when there's the most opportunity in our space. And it's Warren Buffett's, famous saying that as an investor, you want to invest when you want to be bullish and invest when most people are fearful, and the opposite, when everybody is most excited, is when you should be most fearful. This is what that looks like for real estate. So what is our strategy? So in each of these quadrants, there's different ways that we're thinking about what we're doing with investing. So in this quadrant, coming out when things are improving, but you can buy cheaper than you can build, it's a great time to buy assets. Then once assets start trading above replacement cost, well, we should be building because we can end up with a building cheaper than we could buy for it. Now, everyone wants to sell at the peak. And I'll show you kind of a little bit of our history of how we've tried to do that. The challenge with this, you never really know that it's the peak until it's no longer the peak. But this is the philosophical ideal world. Here's the most difficult part of the cycle. What do you do here? There, it's basically about buckling down. And that anytime, any assets you haven't sold, it's how do you manage them so that you can make sure that you're going to avoid the worst. So keeping your occupancies up, renewing tenants a lot faster. we tried to foresee this, and whereas others may be still thinking you're at the peak and getting greedy with tenants and saying, we'd only want short-term leases because we can increase their rents more next year. We take the opposite approach, and we're like, let's push them out as far as we can because I've lived through too many of these times. Once you get into this section, this is where people have made a lot of money in history over going to the banks who have troubled assets and say, hey, had to foreclose on those buildings, we'll buy them for some fraction of replacement cost or what your debt is, or sometimes even a discount on the debt. So there's actually steps that you can take in each of these as a real estate company. So here's just kind of a look at, I've lived through 4 of these cycles in my career. So, and where the peaks are, so you have like the kind of late 80s go-go days, the 90s and the internet, bubble, the right before the GFC, and then we'll talk about kind of where we are today, and then these troughs. And so I mentioned often it may be some external shock combined with the excesses of development that leads to where you are in the cycle. So I started, and I was practicing law in 92 and joined the family business in 93. So it was the S&L crisis that took us from this late 80s peak to the depth of the recession in the early 90s. Then you kind of started coming back out in the Clinton era. We actually had budget surpluses back then. And then the birth of the internet, everything was great until the dot-com crisis hit. Recession in 01, repeat the process, had again, especially with a residential boom, a huge amount of development, huge amount of growth until the subprime crisis hit in 08. That leads to 2009 recession, and then kind of what's happened in the past couple of years. Interesting that I don't have the pandemic up there as the end of it, but rather inflation, because we had so much stimulus that it was really a brief window that real estate was kind of suffering during the pandemic itself, and especially around certain classes like retail. But overall, in our space, it was a huge boon for us during the pandemic. But really, the dramatic rise in inflation and then interest rates starting in 22 is what's caused a lot of valuation problems today. So when I look at kind of the deals that we've done, just to plot you, this is why our investors have given us money and why all of our other strategies, I think, pale in comparison to the timing of how when we're selling assets. So Philip mentioned that I was running my family business in the 1990s, ended up selling it to Blackstone. We closed in November of 1999, a few months before the dot-com crashed. So we were fully leased. When I started, we were 70% leased. By the late 90s, we hit 199% leased. It was only in Atlanta, 10 million square feet. And I was terrified something was going to happen because I'd spent the early part of my time there leasing buildings that had been sitting empty for 5 years. And so I was like to the family, we need to recapitalize the company. So we did it at the peak. And then with Blackstone, even though we sold at the peak, we ran the business for Blackstone, and then we were able to buy assets and then start developing coming out of this, and then sold the company with Blackstone again in 05. So we were right here. We were not at the peak, but it still was a great return. It was a 27% internal rate of return and 2.5 multiple on their investment. So really strong return because we were buying down here, selling up here. So after this is when a couple of us, including Philip, left MD Hodges, and we started MDH Partners. Our first deal is we went to Blackstone, and we bought several buildings with Blackstone, yet another venture. This theme keeps coming up with me. Smaller deals, but we were able to buy them right here and then sell them right in 2007, right at the very peak. And it generated some very large returns for Blackstone. Right after we bought our first deal with Blackstone, we bought a deal with Wells Fargo right in here, and we sold it right as things were starting to collapse. And we were very fortunate that we barely eked that in. 2 months later, the building was unsaleable for another 5 years. It was that close. But obviously, Wells did great on that transaction as well. great. During the GFC, we didn't own a single asset. So we had no problems, which was great. That's actually when I ended up taking off a year and went to Oxford and got my master's in religion for fun. Came back in 2010 and we started investing again. So we reconnected with Wells and we started buying some troubled assets from developers. So we were buying down here and then we sold again. We were pretty far off from the peak, but this kind of spread from buying at this trough to up here, again, resulted in great returns. And these are smaller one-off deals. Then this is the point that we decided, let's scale back up. I mean, it was so slow, those of you that were in business after the GFC, those first few years, it just felt like the economy was just limping along even though we were growing positively for several years. Finally, at the end of 2013, that's when I got introduced to Harvard's endowment, and we started negotiating our large joint venture with them. So that started here, and then we sold that in 2018, the most successful deal of my career, because it was almost a 50% return for Harvard, annualized return. That's what an IRR is, an annualized 50% return, and a 2.5 times multiple. What that means is you give us $100 million, we give you back $250 million in a few years. So it was the largest single real estate, most successful real estate deal Harvard's endowment had ever done. And we thought we were brilliant. We thought 2018 was the absolute peak because it was November of 18 and the fourth quarter then, interest rates started going up then. I was convinced 2019 was going to be a recession. Was completely wrong because we were not at the peak yet. As I mentioned, you only know the peak once it's passed. So this was the same time we were selling this that we launched our first fund. And I was frankly nervous about it because I knew we were selling up here and then we were also investing up here too. And so with our first fund, which was basically the other Ivy League endowments in the fund, that we needed to do it very quickly. So we invested, we started talking to them in 2018. We launched the fund in 2019. And then in the middle of 22, we sold it to the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Singapore. And what we thought at Harvard was our largest deal and best deal of my career actually ended up being the next one that was done right at the peak, but we crammed it in. That deal closed with GIC June 28th, 2022. We were the only billion-dollar deal to close in industrial in the first half of that year, and the last one at the old pricing, because we had gone out to them in January to do the deal. It takes a number of months to get these things closed. So again, it was kind of like the deal with Wells Fargo that we sold, at the last 2 months. Everything else that was happening at the same time didn't close because interest rates had started 3 months earlier, starting to go up really dramatically. So while thinking about our other strategies of how we build, how we buy is all very important, the reason I think this has really been the key to our returns, when you look at it like this, of when we've been able to get in and out of the market. So real estate is so much about timing, and I think it really trumps the business cycles, trump almost everything else in our space. So kind of one question that some people ask is, well, where are we today? It's always much harder when you're in that moment to figure where you are. So this is kind of my best guess as to where some of the different real estate asset classes are today. So we're well down from the peak. Where cap rates, when we were selling the portfolio to GIC, that was a 3.8% cap rate. It's kind of how we value real estate. If you think about kind of what is your first year returns on that, 3.8%. The same portfolio today, 5.7%. So 200 basis points increase in cap rates, decrease in the valuation of that. Now, the fundamentals are actually still doing pretty good. Our occupancies are starting to come down a little bit, but overall, across the country, industrial is under 5% vacant. So even though the vacancies have gone up, rents are still going up. The fundamentals look good, but inflation has changed the whole picture of the valuation of real estate in every real estate class. Multifamily was kind of the other shining star with industrial over the past 10 years. It's been hit harder with interest rates and also with overbuilding, especially here in the Southeast. Whereas our leases with our tenants might be 5 years long, theirs are every year. So when everything's going up, that's great. You can keep raising the multifamily rents, right, on your apartments. The problem is when you start overbuilding, like we've seen in the Southeast in the last few years, combined with inflation, those rents can start coming down just as quickly as they go up. So it's a little bit more of an area of concern right now with multifamily. Retail, small neighborhoods, strip centers. Retail overall has been out of favor for the past 8 years because of e-commerce. But your small kind of public shopping centers have kind of been the strongest of those. The Class A malls, that would be Lenox and Phipps across the street here, again, been hit hard from a valuation standpoint. And you're having to see developers like Simon. Now you've got a Nobu hotel and the restaurants, and you're putting apartments and trying to figure out what do you do with these old, really infill great locations, but people aren't shopping in malls like they used to. Office, I've got us at about 530. It looks really bad. It is going to get much worse with office, and a lot's going to depend on what the banks do. Any office building is worth definitely half of what it was worth 4 years ago today. And a lot of funds have been writing them down, but they haven't written them down enough. The banks are carrying them, often at their, the par value, and it's just not the case at all. So the banks have been trying to play a kick the can approach with a lot of the office developers and owners, and hoping that things are going to get better. And a lot kind of depends on what happens with work from home and with interest rates. B and C malls, they need to be bulldozed. I don't know where, the Macon Mall, stuff like that. I mean, I don't know what you do with those things. So I've added, I think there's the last 30 days, so I've got industrial here. We've seen, Philip and I were talking about this right before we came out here. There has been a huge rush of capital back into our space in the last 30 days. Deals that in October and November had 4 groups bidding on them, right now have 40 institutions bidding on them. And the reason is industrial still looks better than everything else. And so much capital, there's billions of dollars of capital that has to be invested. And so people see industrial as a safe haven. And we've seen cap rates, whereas I mentioned with our GIC portfolio, cap rates went up 200 basis points over the past year and a half, 2 years. In the last 30 days, they've come down 50 basis points just because of the amount of capital. Where this goes, I have no idea. I'm a little bit nervous about that. So the question is, where are things going to go? And one of the things, this is a clean, easy picture, but it never really looks like this because every cycle is different. The timing, how long your ups and downs are, it's never really a circle. It's more of like an egg shape or something like that. How terrible is the recession? And it's going to be different for each asset class. I mean, the GFC was bad for all of real estate. The dot-com crash wasn't as bad for industrial. If you owned office buildings in San Francisco and San Jose, and then all the dot-coms all of a sudden are worth 10% what they were, 2 months earlier, you were in tough shape for a while. So I mentioned like different asset classes are kind of different for each of those. And again, as this theme, it looks so easy when I lay it out like this. When you're living it day to day and your signals are mixed, I mean, October, all of us were terrified. The 10-year Treasury hit 5%. We're like, is it going to go to 6%? What does that mean for where debt is going to be priced? If that's a longer-term thing, cap rates have got to reset even higher. All of a sudden, that starts pulling back, and now everyone is like, oh, okay, we're fine. Interest rates have come down from that. Let's get back in before everybody else does. And yet we've seen that the 10-year went back up 30 basis points again. So the data is unclear, and even though we've had, good luck at timing this, nothing is ever perfect. So how am I doing on time? Let's see where we are on the time here. I had good. So had some, I kind of look back on my career, because people ask me a lot, like kind of what makes you tick? How do you do what you've done? And one answer is like, I have no idea. I'm a very high energy person. My wife is convinced I'm ADHD, even though for fun I got tested once and I'm not. But, and as Philip mentioned, I've had a lot of interesting different hobbies and things like that. I've taught religion, I published novels, and everyone always wants to talk. No one cares about this stuff. People want to know about. We were U.S. champion ballroom dancers 20 years ago. Knew all the people in Dancing with the Stars. Competed internationally. That's the fun stuff people want to know about, and that's just the like. I always need some crazy weird hobby. But when I kind of go back to the real estate and kind of start to think through the themes, and not the technical stuff about how we buy, how we sell, but more the interpersonal things that kind of drive me and what's behind this. So with some introspection, what I started kind of realizing, I think what I call the internal kind of self things versus the external outward facing, how I interact with others. And this is how I kind of break it down. I think the things that contribute to it. So first, a lot of people want to focus on, well, do what you're passionate about. I kind of think about it a little bit differently of, what is your purpose in life? Why are we here? What are we here to do? And for me, that's really evolved over my career. Running a family business, there was, a purpose for the larger kind of long-term, benefit of the family. And there's a lot of, this focus on family and everything. I will tell you this, my view of family business is it's infinitely more stressful and difficult than dealing with large New York private equity firms. Or as my CFO way back 25 years ago told me, he said, Jeff, I needed a degree in psychology more than a degree in accounting to work in your family business. But then, I went through different phases of my career. Where I am today, I love what I do. And for the reason why I do is, one, I'm a little bit of a deal junkie. The deals are fun. But it's about our team that we've built up and our investors. And today, I think having this incredible group of large nonprofits, whether it's big universities, very large foundations, that the hundreds of millions of dollars that they entrust us with and that we make for them goes back into the goods for society. And there's nothing wrong philosophically I have with making billionaires more money, but it's very different when I know, and we get letters after the GIC transaction from these different universities of the money that you guys just made us has funded, 50, 100 scholarships in perpetuity. When it's going to some large foundation, so anyone, you hear like the MacArthur Genius Grants, one of our investors, that we're able to fund scientific and artistic endeavors across the country. That's like, just gives a different level of purpose in me to doing kind of boring concrete boxes around the country. But also, I think sometimes the whole passion with what you do thing can be overrated too. And I think some people think about their careers like, I might be a good accountant or a good lawyer. I'm not passionate about it. I'm really passionate about coaching Little League. And I think that's great. I think it's more about understanding, what it is that's really driving you. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having a difference between a vocation and a passion, and that your vocation may allow you to write books, to coach Little League, to ballroom dance or whatever. And as I mentioned, I've had different parts in my career where, the stress of running a family business, and then for 5 years running a business for Blackstone, I was burned out. And there was a reason that GFC occurred in a great time for me to be able to go. I spent a month in India trekking around and studying yoga and meditating. I went to Oxford and got a master's in religion, and I wrote novels. I needed it intellectually and spiritually at the time, and allows me to then return and do what I do today in a very different way. As part of all of that, I think that having an open mind and just constantly being curious and asking questions. When I joined my family business, and I didn't know anything about real estate. I thought I was smart because I had these Ivy League degrees, and I'd been at King & Spalding, and then I come in and I just devoured information and tried to learn my business. But the question I always asked was why? Why do we do this way? Why are we doing this? And it was because I wanted to know. And I got a really unsatisfactory answer for so long from the people that worked for my grandfather, who'd been successful for 40 years, of, well, that's the way we've always done it. And I've never been satisfied with that. And so my favorite thing, and I had a lot of issues with, I would all of a sudden ask, well, what if we did it this way instead? And we get pushback and well, we can't do that because we've always done it this way. My favorite thing is when I hire new people that have been at our competitors, and then we come in and I start asking them, well, how did so-and-so do it? And then I would love to steal great ideas from other people. Like, no shame, you don't need to be original. It's like, so I always want to see, is there a better way of doing something than we're doing it today? Similarly, I think we all realize we're living in a world of unprecedented change. That what's happened with technology, I mean, if you were in the big box retail, and you were building Toys R Us, buildings, Sports Authority, these things, you've been kind of screwed of what happened, and it wasn't your fault. You weren't doing anything wrong as a real estate developer, but the ground shifted underneath you with Amazon. And so I think being open-minded and having to look at changing your business models, we're in this kind of part-time right now with AI. None of us really knows what it's going to do, other than I think we're going to see some exponential growth and the impacts of that over the next decade. How it looks, I'm not sure, but we're always asking those questions. And the same theme around this is I'm someone that's never satisfied with just the status quo. And when I say I'm always thinking about growth, I'm never thinking about the growth of my business. I'm thinking about the growth of me as an individual. And it's multidimensional. It's like, how can I learn more? So I have a love-hate relationship with going to conferences. And I tell my wife every time I go to some real estate, I was just talking to one of my friends here. I was just in Dubai a few weeks ago for a global real estate conference. Long-ass way to fly. But fascinating, kind of interesting, kind of like a Disney World does the Arab world, kind of place. But I go to these conferences, and my rule of thumb is I come away with one or two takeaways anytime I go to a conference. The challenge is, and my tolerance of sitting there for 6 or 8 hours, in a day listening to people is a lot lower than it was 20 years ago. But it's like I never know when those one or two nuggets are going to come through that I'm going to take away. And I'm constantly searching for more and more learning and information to grow, to figure out how we're gonna pivot and do our business. But it's not just about the intellectual, it's the personal growth as well. My spiritual growth. It really affects how I am as a CEO. And that kind of goes to the external piece here. So the first is, I think there's an interesting tension between EQ and IQ. So I was a much too young CEO. And I got to be that when I was 31, because being in a family business and my grandfather's health deteriorated a lot faster than we hoped it would. But I was very enamored with my ideas and my intellect. And I assumed I would have these great ideas and everybody should just immediately do what I have because they would recognize my brilliance. And this is why we should be doing this deal and this deal and this deal, or restructuring it, or starting an office division, mixed-use division that we did with the development up in Gwinnett County at Sugarloaf Parkway. And I would keep getting pushback because while I was like decent on the IQ piece, my EQ, like my ability to read and understand those dynamics, whether it was a family business or the interpersonal stuff as we were transitioning with Blackstone, was just not as developed. And I have my wife to thank for this, who, thank goodness, 15 years ago or so, whenever it was, we went to marital therapy for a couple of years. And that actually, not only did it make me a much better husband, it made me a much, much better CEO. Because and today, like, I would stress EQ more than IQ, because ultimately, everything that we do is about relationships. And whether it's relationships in the company and understanding people's desires, their wants, what's driving them, but as we're negotiating with people too. To me, the art of negotiation, it's not like games that you're playing, it's how can I really understand what this other person wants? And often it's not just the highest price. And I mentioned earlier, we do a lot of deals with non-institutional owners, with family businesses, with local small developers. We do a lot of joint ventures with groups as well. And sometimes it's someone, might come in, a private equity, we'll just pay you the most for your land. But I want to go and talk to them, well, what are your tax things that you're thinking about? Do you really need the cash today? Or what if we could structure a joint venture and you can put your land in, we'll come in, we'll do all the work, we'll bring the additional $20 million that it's going to take to build your land, and then in 3 or 5 years, we'll sell it, and then what you were going to make, we can double or triple it. and you're going to have a long-term capital gain on that as well. So understanding those kind of different dynamics allows us to structure things differently. At the same time, the importance of our reputation. I mentioned we want to be known as a group with incredible capital, with this great institutional capital that's long-term thinking and strategic, but that is also we're good people and easy to work with. And we have a simple kind of thesis of we do what we say we're going to do. And this is probably the greatest lesson I learned from my grandfather, that, you know, he even though I was a lawyer, he did not like lawyers at all, didn't care for contracts. None of that mattered. If you shook his hand, you had a deal. And I took that from him, and it sounds very old-fashioned, but the number of deals that we win coming in second and third place on pricing, because the brokers in the deal and then the people that are selling know that, hey, if we tell you we're going to pay you $50 million for your buildings and we're going to close in 45 days, that in 45 days you will have 50 million, not 48, and it's not going to be in 60 days. You will have it when we tell you. And if for whatever reason some kind of crazy problem comes up, we're going to immediately be open book and let's have a dialogue about it. The number of calls I've gotten from brokers that have said, hey, on this deal, this $50 million deal, you're at 47 million, your competitor is at 50. They don't want to do the deal with your competitor, who's a name brand group, because they know that sometime during due diligence they're going to get retraded. Can you come up from 47 to 48? And if you're $2 million within them, they'll pick you. And that's happened not once, but multiple times with us because of that reputation. And that kind of goes into this kind of concept that it's not just about numbers, it's not just about strategy. Everything we do is about people and relationships. So all these things kind of tie in of kind of, you know, growing on a personal level, thinking about that AQ piece and then the relationships here. And that leads into my final point about when you're dealing with other people's capital, and I'm sure my team is sick of hearing about this from me, but I talk about our fiduciary responsibilities all of the time. And it's capital, it's from our investors, but it's also when the lenders, and we deal with the who's who of the largest and the most interesting regional banks and life cos around the country. And over my 30-something year career, and then even going back over the family business, so a 70-year period, we've never given a building back to a lender. We've never defaulted on a loan. And that doesn't mean everything's gone great. You know, sometimes you're in a tough time and you got to we got to just keep paying the interest on this because the building hasn't leased. We know eventually it's going to work out. But over the long term, that kind of trust and fiduciary is why people will trust us with more and more money. And the problem with this is if you violate that, it takes long. This is not something that you get overnight. You know, trust, we always hear trust is earned, but trust can be lost in a second if you do something. And so anytime I'm talking with my CFO and the accounting and how you process all this stuff, it's incredibly complex. And the fees and the promotes that we're getting from our investors, they're huge. And there's always gray area in how you calculate this stuff. Anytime we have a discussion, if there is a gray area of we could easily justify this extra $1 million could come to us, or maybe 200 really belongs to us, and if you want to decide in the investors, the other 800,000 goes to them. Anytime there's a gray area, even if we can justify it, the gray area goes in favor of our investors. Because if you ever lose that trust, and the analogy that I use here is about keeping the M&M jar full. This is my last point, and I'll open it up to some questions. We've got one daughter. She finishes her PhD at the University of Texas next week. Brilliant girl. My wife came up with something I thought very creative when she was a toddler, and we were struggling with the potty training stage. So what my wife did is, my daughter loved candy. She had a jar that she put on the kitchen counter. Every time our daughter would use the bathroom properly, put a couple M&Ms in the jar. And then over time, those M&Ms would add up. If she made a mistake and didn't use the bathroom, my my wife would call her in, they'd take the M&Ms, and they'd pour it into the trash can, and my wife's daughter would just fall, and then you'd have to start from scratch. And then at the end of the week, she could eat the M&Ms. Whatever M&Ms were in the jar, she could eat the M&Ms. It took one time of pouring the M&Ms out, and that was it she was potty trained. So that's kind of the way trust is. You build that up M&M at a time, and if you do one thing, that one corner you cut, you can lose trust forever. And we're in this business for the long term, and my investors, one of the great things about them, not only are they incredibly sharp, as they're doing diligence and trying to figure out who they're investing with, they spend much more time on who you are as a person than what your business strategy is. And because they want to make sure they're going to entrust this money to you, and that it's going to be a very long-term investment, because they don't want to just do one fund, they want to do 5, 6, 7, 8 funds, and we're on fund 3 already after only 5 years because of that trust. And again, it doesn't mean that everything goes well. And I keep telling my team, the worst thing that you can do is hide mistakes, and think that that's when things go wrong. You make a mistake, you hide it, and then thinking, oh, well, hopefully I'll figure it out and we'll correct it. I do not get mad when people screw up. Instead, our culture is we have to talk about it fast and early, internally, and you're not going to get punished because we all are going to screw up. And sometimes they're small, and sometimes it's $1 million mistake. And then let's tackle it, let's figure out what we're going to do about it, and let's communicate it to our investors or a lender, whatever that we've done. If it's a small foot fault, if it's something bigger, we want to go immediately and talk about it. That's going to build trust because it's not easy. It's incredibly difficult to do that and have those conversations. And then we're going to explain this is what we're doing to correct it. And 2 things can happen with that. One, things can get much worse, but if it does, you've not hidden anything. And they're prepared for that bad news. More often than not, it's not as bad as you think that it initially is. And that by disclosing it and then telling what you're doing to fix the problem, and then some months, year later or whatever, when things are resolved and it wasn't as bad, you actually look like a hero and you've taken something negative and made it a positive. So anyway, just a little bit of everything, of some kind of real estate 101 to our history and philosophy of how I think about business. I think we have time for some questions if anyone has it. And thank you again for having me here. Yes.
Just if a lot of young people in the audience here starting in real estate, any advice and thoughts on what a good path is and what they should be thinking about?
Yeah, go into tech. No, I was talking to my nephew, and he's like, "What should I do?" And I'm like, "Go find a job at a venture capital firm." No, it's a great question. So real estate is always going to be around, whatever happens. We got to have physical space. To me, I think having the financial skills is incredibly important. So you need to understand the numbers and understand underwriting. So taking the courses that you guys have in finance is incredibly helpful. And then finding a place with good mentors that can do a lot of different things. To me, to be a great, with my team, some groups, you'll start as an analyst and then you become an associate. If you're an acquisitions person and you underwrite deals and then you get a little responsibility for doing one and then you kind of grow more narrowly. I think in real estate, the broader exposure you have to more aspects of the business. I love my acquisitions people, the people that are going out telling me, hey, we should buy this building in Dallas or Phoenix, to have actually worked on the leasing and management side of the business. Because if you've spent 5 years leasing buildings out, you're going to know much better, is this building you want to buy, is this something that if you were leasing it, how would you be as a leasing person? So I think being at a place where you could have kind of multi-dimensional kind of aspects to exposure to marketing and leasing and finance, development, acquisitions is helpful. It's wherever you can get that kind of experience, and a lot depends on what you want to do. So there's very different models. I'm an institutional model, and it has some great benefits. And if you want to go the institutional path, it's a lot easier if you start that and you're going to start lower doing kind of grunt work with someone who has institutional capital. And it's great. I mean, I have access, you see, to billions of dollars. There's a totally different model, and that's Philip's model, where you kind of can be much more entrepreneurial, and then you're sourcing your capital from friends and family, high net worth. And as we talk sometimes of doing deals, Philip gets much better terms from his investors. Hopefully none of yours are in here right now. He gets much better terms from his investors and splits than I get from mine. So it's a very different model, and a lot depends on the individual and kind of your mindset. And if you're more entrepreneurial, being with a small shop, and it's something that you can kind of learn from them and either grow with them or go off on your own, as Philip did, and then kind of chart your own path where you're your own boss and you're getting different kind of splits and things versus kind of the institutional world. And there's not a right or wrong answer to that. It just really depends on your kind of personal makeup. And, the reporting that we've got to do is very different from the reporting that you have to do for people. And the 200 questionnaires that we get on ESG from the different endowments. And they'll each send us one, and they're not all the same. It takes literally a staff of people to answer those kinds of questions from them. I know you're not getting those kind of questions. So there's pluses and minuses to all of that stuff. But it's about getting in there, getting experience, rolling up your sleeves, doing what it takes to get done, and make yourself valuable to whoever your boss is. And if you make yourself valuable, you'll find opportunities. And if your boss is an a-hole, then go find someone else to work for. Life is too short for that. I don't put up with politics and BS at our firm at all. So, yes, Alan.
Jeff, thank you for doing this again. I feel like I just got another MBA in real estate. I had the honor of knowing your grandfather. He was a great man, and he never sold anything, right?
Yes, it was a very different model. The family business model, again, they're all the different models so I've sold everything that I've owned, whatever that was, 6 or 7 times in my career. He almost never sold anything in 40 years. And so the world is different today, though. And back in those days, real estate was dominated by family businesses, non-entrepreneurial, so you had on the industrial side people like my grandfather, the Patillos, the Kunianskis, you had Portman on the office side. You had these independent, developers that could build up slowly over decades this portfolio that you would pay down debt over time and build up these long-term assets. Today, real estate is a totally different, it is an institutionalized business. And there's always going to be a place for the, Philip and Hardman, the entrepreneurial guys that can get in there and find these interesting deals and create value and stuff that we can't go and do. But largely, it's institutional capital in the space. The way it literally didn't exist. REITs weren't around until 1994. Coming out, it was one of the things of coming out of the S&L crisis. People started taking the REIT structure existed, but they weren't out there, until people had to access that capital. Private equity firms, Blackstone started in real estate in '93. So that stuff didn't exist back in my grandfather's day. So,
Are y'all going to stay out of the data center business? Or are you
I had a meeting on that yesterday. Anyone wants to talk about data centers and has some ideas, we would love. I got $1.2 billion of equity to figure out what to do with. I think data centers is the single most interesting investment thesis over the next decade. Yes.
I think I got the mic now.
You did? Yeah.
Jeff, thanks so much for the presentation. It was wonderful, specifically the themes of success at the end and focusing on those growth areas. You listed intellectual, personal, and experiential. But obviously, we all have this great limiter of time. Can you talk a little bit about how you prioritize growing in those areas, maybe at different times without neglecting the others?
Yeah, you're right. And I think scheduling time is always a challenge. I put in my, and I'm not as good as I used to be about this. I put my time in my calendar, usually it's Tuesday mornings, to come in the office late and work from like a coffee shop or something where I'm not distracted, and do it as my strategic thinking time where I can just go off my own and just journal. and journal and think more deeply about stuff, because if you don't build that time in, you won't be able to do it. If any lunch that I'm not with someone else, I'm reading. So I try to build those things in, and like you say, you go through periods in your career where you need more than others. We just had a period where I brought in an executive coach for my whole team, and we did 360, or my whole executive team. We did 360s and have been doing team building stuff, and it included me as well. And I'm like, okay, over the decades, I've had enough of this stuff, and everything from personal therapy to coaching and business growth from different organizations that I've been a member of. But I'm like, I've got to make myself take that time out, and I'm going to meet with the coach once a week, and we're going to talk about stuff. So it's about prioritizing it, and for me, it means I have to put it in my calendar. So it can literally be thinking time that's in my calendar, reading time, or else it won't get done, and other stuff will take that over instead. Great question.
Awesome, thank you.
Yes. We'll know in like a year or two, won't we? I mean, it's one of those, there's so much wishful thinking in investing. And it doesn't matter whether it's real estate, whether it's equities, whether it's bonds, which is why when I think about my real estate clock, I put the psychology, the hope, the excitement, the exuberance, the concern, the fear, the despair in there. Because investment is as much about psychology as it is about the reality of what's going on, the fundamental things in the market. And often people get focused so much on the fundamentals. Now, the fundamentals can drive psychology, but there's the reason why we have cycles, and it's not just this, right? It's never this. It's not even, a slow, like you would like it just to be slow and things just kind of grow along over time, but it's this, and it may go upward, but it's going to go upward like this because of that psychology, and that's why you get bubbles and you get cycles. And it's very hard to know. I've been terrible at predicting this stuff. Like, I've been thinking, 2 years ago, I was telling my investors, I'm worried about stagflation. I think of course we're going to have a recession. It's going to occur in the fourth quarter of 23. Wrong. Not first quarter of 24. Nope. I don't know. Have we avoided it, or does it keep getting pushed off? Like, I'm starting to come around, maybe because I've been wrong for so long now, that maybe it'll be a soft landing. I'd be worth a whole lot more money if I could predict that stuff, right? We all would. The stocks feel a little kind of crazy right now, don't they? Feel a little bit overvalued. It's a little, you got to believe in a lot of things, and yet you could have said that same thing 12 months ago. You could easily have made a case 12 months ago. Don't put move all your money out of stocks and sit in cash because we're heading into a recession and the things feel strongly valued. You would have missed a 20% bump or whatever it's gone up. I mean, I wish I could answer that question, but thank you. Yeah. I think single family is really interesting. For our business, it's actually very important because it is a big driver. One of the reasons Atlanta, we all know the growth engine that Atlanta has been over the last few decades. Atlanta and Orlando, another very fast-growing city, were two of the slowest cities coming out of the GFC. And the reason for that is the GFC was driven by, the subprime crisis and single-family development. And people didn't realize how dependent our economy had grown on single-family development. So it's not just the developers, it's all your granite slab companies, your plumbing contractors, your HVAC contractors. Those are all big tenants of ours. And so you shut off single-family development, and that shuts off a huge piece of demand for industrial real estate and growth in your overall economies. And it took us longer to come out. Usually Atlanta comes out of recessions faster than the national average. We were slower because of the drag of the single family development. So I think we're always watching of what's going on with that right now. And that's been kind of we're in this weird situation in that we have a severe shortage of single-family homes in our country right now, which is one of the things that's driven multifamily development over the past decade. But then interest rates are so high that, you know, people can't afford to do it. So it's, you know, something has to give with that tension, you know, over the next few years. But, you know, it's something, I'm not sure exactly where I'd put that on the clock, because it's and like it looked like a couple months ago as a spigot starting to turn back on. You know, interest rates are coming down, but now it's gone back up a little bit. Another great question. I wish I knew the answer for that.
Time for
one more question. One more quick one. Yes.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about your non-business ventures, whether it's being an author or ballroom dancing, studying religion, and the impact that that's had on your business?
Yeah, I think that, so as you mentioned, as I mentioned earlier, I've had a varied kind of hobbies and interests. I think it's all about that curiosity piece of my mind and constantly trying to grow and learn different things. You know, often it'll be an interesting way to connect with somebody, you know, over a weird shared topic, you know, or something like that. But I think it's more about just kind of my personal and intellectual growth and that constantly seeking out to learn something new and to challenge myself. To me, the huge real estate deals that I've done were not nearly the most challenging things that I've done in my life. Publishing my first novel took me 6 years and 20-something rejections, 3 years to write it, 3 years of getting rejected over and over again and rewriting it over and over again before I finally published it and ended up being a top 40 bestseller on Amazon. But it took forever, and I couldn't give up. And I think part of it, that persistence of getting rejected, getting depressed, because so much more of who I am as a person would go into writing than it would is much more personal than buying a real estate deal or building a building. You know, that doesn't say anything about who I am as a person. That's just business. You know, this was my personal, like, soul went into my first book. The second one was a lot easier, but the first one, I think getting rejected and never giving up, that resilience that created was just kind of a life lesson for me. And with that, I'm so appreciative of you guys having me. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you, Jeff. That was fantastic. Ready to offer you a job at UGA to teach for us as well. So we've got a great red and black sculpture for you. Thank you for today.
Thank you so much.